If you haven't heard episode 0, do that now. It's only about 6 minutes. Then hear episode 4, if you haven't yet. That one's about 12 minutes. Those 2 short episodes provide important context that make what you're about to hear significantly more potent.
Welcome to Stifled Cry. In this episode, we learn about Eva Edl. We traveled through canopies of oaks, past tall pine woods in South Carolina on a rainy, mid-autumn afternoon. The weather made you want to cozy up with a book and a hot drink at your grandmother's house. We were nervous. I remember saying that, in a strange way, it felt like we were about to meet someone for a first date. We were familiar with Eva's story, though neither of us had had the opportunity to meet Eva in person until this day. Eva's life is one that most never lived to tell. We missed her house on the first pass and had to turn around. And as we finally entered the driveway, we noticed that her home lies beneath great oaks that stretch out like guardians in charge of something very special. After many deep breaths and a prayer, we stepped out of the car, grabbed our gear, walked up to the door, and knocked. A smiling little woman greeted us from across the threshold and invited us in with a voice you'd expect of Little Red Riding Hood's grandmother. We stepped through and marveled at how everything was in its perfect place. Old-world decorations that seemed not only to make the house feel like home, but also seemed to be at home in their perfect place. She laughed and said, "Oh, it's a granny home." It was immediately obvious how she had earned her name in the pro-life community. Oma Eva. Oma is the German word for grandmother. And in front of us was the perfect picture of what we all imagine a grandmother to be. We set up the microphones, triple-checked that everything was working, and then started talking with Oma Eva about her life. It was evident right away that we weren't the only nervous ones. We restarted the interview a few times at Oma's request. After a few minutes in which we all got to be a bit more comfortable, we started talking about her life and the history of her people.
Before America existed, before Germany existed, my ancestors settled by the Danube in the Balkan Peninsula after the Turks had come through under the Ottoman Empire in the 1600s and decimated the people, the population. We were under a monarchy with the Holy Roman Empire under Charles VI. So they wanted to repopulate that area all the way up to the Black Sea with Germanic people, German-speaking, but dialect that is ancient. So my people started to float down the Danube on barges because they were promised a piece of land and freedom. See, they were serfs until then. My mother's ancestors came from an area which is now Bavaria, the Black Forest, in 1740. Anyway, that whole area of the Danube, where it comes from Hungary all the way through what is now Serbia and Romania to the Black Sea, was settled alongside the Danube with these people that drained the marshes and made the most fertile ground. To the first generation, we had a saying, "Die ersten hatten den Tod, die zweite die Not, und die dritten das Brot." The first generation died, most of them from malaria and stuff. The second generation suffered a great deal. And finally, the third generation has the bread. And my tiny 4% of the whole population in Yugoslavia was my ethnic group. Danube Swabians, we were called, kind of like the Pennsylvania Dutch. But they were per capita very well off because of the rich farmlands, which was used for export and so on. We were always a minority, and whether Hungary ruled us or Serbia ruled us, we were the minority. And when the Germans took over in 1941, we were half-breeds, so we were always looked down upon, you know. After the Nazis were driven out of the country, because we were invaded in 1941, after they were pushed back by the Russians, the Allied put Marshal Tito of the partisan resistance against the Nazis in power. All the ethnic Germans from the other countries, like Poland and Czechoslovakia and all, they expelled them, except my country decided to exterminate every man, woman, and baby in order to take over what we had. At the end of 1944, they set up these concentration camps. These camps were kept open and running until 1948, till almost everybody was dead. And my people group no longer exists. I would call that a Holocaust also. And the reason it's been suppressed, because the Allied forces were the one that put Tito in power.
Can you tell me some about your parents?
Oh, I had the best mother and father in the whole wide world. I knew nothing but love, and grandparents. And my daddy, he was a fun guy. He was open for all kinds of adventures. Like I was the one with the heart to always help animals, you know. I dragged every stray cat home, every mangy cat and the dogs. My brother shot a bird, and I took it in and I nursed it till he could fly again, you know. So my father thought, okay, she would like a bat, I'm sure. So he tore down a whole chimney to get a bat for me to put in the cage. He would carry me on his shoulders. Yeah, he was a fun person. Mother was a hardworking, morning to night person. She's more serious, yeah. My grandfather was a furniture maker, excellent one, I must say. And grandmother just took care of grandfather, okay. Yes, my parents grew up in a very small town, ethnic German town, because we had little towns with each ethnic group. When they settled from various areas, they brought their own language, their own dialect, their own customs and costumes. My town alone would not even intermarry with another German-speaking town because they had originally come from a different part of what later on became Germany, and they spoke a different dialect. The town was kind of religious, okay? Everybody went to the Catholic Church, but it was hard to tell if it was for real. We had traditions, festivals every year where everybody gathered either for a fish cookout or things, because we're near the Danube. We had our hired, the richest people, then we had middle class, and then the worker class. My parents were kind of from the middle class, the lower middle class, poor, with other words. And they got married very young because in our culture, children had to go to work at age 12 already. So my father became a shoemaker. He was an apprentice at first, and mother worked in the field or whatever she had to do with babysit or whatever as a young lady. They got married very young. My mother was 19. My father was 20 years old. You could not go to the bank and borrow money to build a house. So they just bought a small little home and worked hard. But they had no opportunity for education. So they took jobs as laborers. They ended up working together at a brick factory. And by then they had already my sister and my brother. My father, since he was a smart man, pretty soon became the manager of that brick factory, okay? And my father made sure that we were always in church, because when he was young, he wanted to be a priest. However, he had some kind of a brain infection. They would not accept him because they thought something happened to his mind, and he was a brilliant man. My father and mother didn't pray the rosary, that much I know. I don't know how far their faith went, but they believed in Jesus.
Yeah. How did growing up in the Catholic Church affect you?
Well, we all went to Catholic school. That's the only kind of school we had. And we had Catholic nuns teach us girls. Everybody had First Communion in second grade, so you were prepared to understand it. Now, I understood it, but my sister told me later on, she said she never heard that stuff. It must have been told. She had the same nun, but she just didn't hear. Okay. But Simply that nun, what she said, I remember to this day, was that she taught us the Ten Commandments, and she taught us that when you sin just one time, you're a sinner, you're a lawbreaker, and no lawbreaker can go to heaven. But God loved us so much, he let Jesus come to earth to pay for all our sins by shedding his blood. And she said he loved you so much, he shed every last drop in his body. This still gets me. She also prepared us for things to come. She must have had an inkling that things are going very bad with the war, and she must have heard the news because she was trying to prepare us for suffering.
How did she do that?
She did it with parables. One I still remember very vividly. We were, in those days we had no cars or anything. We had blacksmiths and horse and buggy and walked most places. But she took the blacksmith as the example, how God shapes us. She said, the blacksmith takes a piece of metal and puts it in the fire, makes it red hot. Then he takes it and puts it over an anvil, and then he starts pounding it until it looks exactly like the horseshoe that he wants. And she said, that's what happens in your life when you suffer. You are like in the blacksmith's fire. And if you let God pick you up and put you over his anvil and shapes you, he'll make you more like Jesus. But that shaping doesn't feel good. It hurts. But if you refuse and you just have that hot metal cool off on its own, it turns out nothing more than a warped piece of junk. And I took that to heart. In fact, later on in the death camp, I used to pray all the time, okay, just make me, shape me. I was trying to lie very still on the anvil. And the other thing she told us also, which is something that people need to remember now, with all the horror going around us and the YouTube and the Facebook and all these pictures. And she said, when you experience horrible things, don't become a spectator. She said it will affect you. Unless you can help them, don't stand there and gawk. And I had to remember that later in life too. The other thing, she wanted to make sure that we do things with pure motives. And what she had us do, we made a manger with matchsticks and a matchbox. And then you were supposed to do something special and kind to somebody in secret, all for Jesus alone. And every time you did that, you were allowed to take a little piece of straw and put it in the manger. But the hardest thing is you do that and somebody else gets the credit and you want to say, no, I did it. But then it's no longer done for Jesus. She taught us a lot. She said, you are like a mirror, pure and reflect back Jesus. But what if a fly lands on it and puts a speck on it? Well, you don't notice that speck. That speck is your sin. And then you sin some more. Before long, the whole mirror is covered with black specks and you don't see Jesus anymore.
So when did your people start getting taken to the camps?
It started in 1941. I was right before my 6th birthday. My father was by then the manager of the brick factory that they worked on. And we lived on the premises because it was outside of town. And I heard these staccato gunshots and a plane. And when it was over, my father came in and out of breath. And he told us that a plane had come and was chasing a Yugoslavian soldier that was running. The others had already been killed. He found this soldier in one of the drying sheds of the brick. And so Father came in and took some clothing to give that man some of his own clothes to escape and not be caught. That was my first memory. And after that, the Hungarian and Germans came together because they were in league with one another. They didn't harm us because we were ethnic German, so they didn't harm the other people either. So they just came through, the armies came through. But in the meantime, our lives just went on as normal because the bombing and the fighting was going on elsewhere, It was not until towards the end of the war in 1944, the Germans on their retreat took my daddy with them. We never saw him again. And my father one time called home after they took him. He could barely speak because he had, I think, emphysema, enlarged heart, and all kinds of health problems. And he said, flee, the Russians are coming and they're brutal. Well, my dear mother and a lot of the people said, we haven't done anything wrong, especially who would harm us? That was our attitude, total disbelief, until in the spring of 45. That's when Sunday morning, we got up to go to church. The Russian troops were in our own house. The Russians came through and took my mother and my grandfather with them to dig trenches at the front because the war was going on right by the Danube there. So that left my 15-year-old sister, my 12-year-old brother, and I was 9 at that time. I looked like the one that led them, what you call him, colonel or somebody. I looked like his little girl. And so he put us under his protection, and the others, they were not allowed to rape us or anything. So that was when it started. And then the Russians moved on, and these rumors started happening that there is the Serbian resistance group under Marshal Tito. They called them the partisans. We didn't know about Marshal Tito or anything. We just knew the partisans had been so cruel and torturing other people and stuff. There were rumors that they're going to take us away. Grandmother was of Hungarian descent, so she was not in danger. In order to try to save us and protect us, she took us to the brick factory and built us into one of the firing chambers and brought us food, at night. But then it seemed like the rumors were false, and all is well, you can go back to your normal life, and boom, all of a sudden there were the partisans with their guns drawn. And we had a few minutes to pack up. All you were allowed to do is one outfit, a dress, a spoon, and a dish. And we had these big duvets, you couldn't take them, so if you had a shawl or a little blanket, you could wrap that right up. And that's all we had. And we were taken out of our homes, put on a forced march. And on that march again, I remembered what I was taught by that little nun. Lord bless her, I hope to see her. She taught us to pray a certain prayer, to meditate on what Jesus suffered for us. To remember that if he could do it, he can help us do it. And so that, and I heard of pilgrimages in my childhood, and I said, well, I'll make this a pilgrimage. And I started praying, and I didn't look right or left at what happened. No food, no water. And I got so thirsty at one point that I just ran to the next ditch and plunged my head into that green, slimy water and just slurped it up. Thank goodness grandmother, she thought she was going to be smart. She took a little flask of whiskey or something, and she quickly made me drink and swish my mouth. Don't know if it helped or not, but I didn't get sick, thank God. After that march, we were taken to a small ethnic German town where we were divided up. Children under 12 and elderly and the sick and the babies were put in one section, and I was 9, so I was in that section. My brother was placed, he was 12, into another section with the men, and my sister in another section with the women. We didn't know what would happen to us. My grandmother, who was not in danger because she was Hungarian of descent, and so she disguised herself, looking very feeble and all. So pushed her into my section. Had it not been for that sacrificial act, I don't know I would be alive nowadays. And so they put us on a cattle car. I didn't know what happened to my brother or sister. Did not know where mother was, didn't know if father was alive or my grandfather. So we were placed in a cattle car and shipped to an ethnic German town that was evacuated of every stick of furniture and everything. And they put just a layer of straw into the rooms. And that's where they placed 21,000 of us in there, body to body. We had no towel, we had no change of clothes. We had no latrines. There was just a little outhouse in the backyard of these little homes, and a hand pump in the courtyard but you couldn't wash. So it wasn't long before, and the food they gave us was about a ladle full of what they called pea soup. It was mainly water, warm water, and a few peas, a few shells of peas, and mostly black beetles and larvae of beetles. That was our breakfast, and for supper we got the same thing. And a couple of times a week, once or twice a week, we got a little piece of cornmeal mush, kind of cornbread, and that was our nourishment. And before long, people had diarrhea, dysentery, typhoid broke out, no medical help. I was going downhill fast, too, with my health. Besides starving, I developed where these bugs get under your skin, and scurvy. So I would sit. There was a corner by a door in the courtyard. I would just sit there all cuddled up there and sing to the Lord and pray. I still remember the two songs. To this day, I still remember all the verses of Fairest Lord Jesus in German, and "O great God, we praise your name." This is all I knew, and that's what I sang. And I prayed the Our Father, and I prayed the Apostles' Creed, and I don't know, I just tried to make life as much as I could interesting. I found some rags, and I made a little doll out of it, and would sit there with my doll and sing to the Lord. Yeah.
And your grandmother was with you this
My grandmother was with me, and what saved her, because she could speak 3 languages fluently. She spoke our German, she spoke Hungarian, because she was Hungarian, and she spoke Serbian. The Serbian partisans, they were our guards, they had her clean their quarters. And so she could snatch food a lot of times, and here and there she would bring me something too. In fact, one time she got favor with 2 of them. I think I made my way to where she was, and they let me come in. The guy said to my grandma, "She looks like my girl." And he gave me some food. And every once in a while, Grandma was able to smuggle something to me and feed me, yeah. It got really bad after a while, though. I could barely walk. I was just full of sores. That's another thing that the nun taught us. When you are being harmed and hurt, you need to forgive. And if you're persecuted and you haven't done anything wrong, and you take it patiently, that pleases God. And she said, if you're really hurting, don't concentrate on yourself. Pray for somebody else. And I remember one night, somebody was talking in the dark about me and how sorry they felt for me. Apparently somebody came back from the war and said that they know my father had been killed. There, I didn't know if my mother was alive, my sister was alive, or my brother was alive. And now my father's dead too. And I just wanted to scream, but I remembered that. And so I went into the courtyard. I looked up at the sky and started praying for somebody who's dying, who's close to hell, and that the Lord will save him and not send him to hell. And after a while, that burden left. I stopped crying, and I never said a word to my grandmother. I wasn't going to burden her even more than she was burdened. Anyway, all these teachings, they helped me so much. This cross made it through my camp, if that could speak. That was a rosary I was given because my family didn't pray rosaries, but in class, somebody found a rosary, so the nun gave it to me. Anyway, by then they had brought my brother to our camp. In the labor camp, they found him with either a map, he said, or some piece of paper where he tried to figure out where he was. And they accused him of being a spy, stripped him naked, and beat the dickens out of him, he said, and then locked him up in an old butcher's cooling thing, overnight. And then they shipped him to my camp. He had outlived his usefulness. You see, they worked them until they couldn't go on anymore, and then they brought them to replace whoever died, because we had at times 70 or more people die in one day. And people would just put them in a blanket, in their shawl or whatever they had, or just put them out on the street side. They picked them up, put them like cordwood on that wagon, and put them in mass graves. I have an aunt and a cousin who died, and one is in a mass grave of 500, I understand, and the other couple hundred too. But we were not considered to be human. Oh, they're just Schwabitzes. These are animals. And that's what one of the guards said when a woman cried out, why don't you just shoot us? It would be more merciful. He said, you're not even worth a bullet, you animal. But you see, you have to demonize the people you want to eliminate first, so the others don't feel threatened. It's just somebody else. Had it not been for the Lord's help, I would not have gotten out. In the meantime, while we were there, my mother had escaped and come back to our hometown and found out from our Hungarian neighbor that we were taken to different camps. She went out and just walked aimlessly, and she dropped to her knees at one point and said, Lord, if you don't let me find my children, let me perish. And then, lo and behold, she heard some voices. See, our fields were left unharvested and all, and that was now in 45 in the summer. So she heard some German-speaking voices in the cornfields where they were harvesting the corn stalks. And she made her way to them, and there was no guard with them because they were near the camp. And so she wanted to know if her children are there. Well, they said they didn't know, Nobody knew who we were. She asked them to build her into the bottom of the wagon and put all the corn stalks on top of her and take her in to the silo, And when she said, when the partisans, that's the guards, when they probed the stalks with a bayonet, they barely missed her by a fraction of an inch. But as the Lord would have it, the first camp she broke into contained my sister. And the adjacent camp had my brother. Of course, she and my sister were transferred to a hard labor camp down the Danube, where my sister nearly died of malaria and all kinds of things happened. But Mother had no peace, and she just prayed, what can I do? Where do I find my children? And so after my sister recuperated from malaria, she said, we have to escape and try to find your brother and sister. But in the meantime, something happened. They had to work day and night, and it was raining hard, and my mother had been placed in charge of a work group. People were exhausted, hungry and exhausted. She was trying to tell the partisan that was there overseeing them with his gun, begged him to let the women rest a while, I understand, and he wouldn't. And she got so upset, she collapsed. I think she had a heart attack, really. She collapsed. My sister just happened on the scene, and she saw my mother on the ground and the partisan with the gun pointing at her. And she said she blacked out, whatever you call it. She doesn't remember a thing that she did after that. But the ladies later on told her that she went up, grabbed the gun out of his hand, pointed it at him, threw it to the ground, scooped up my mother, and took her to the little hut where they had the straw and put her down. She said, the only reason I knew the ladies told the truth because her arms and hands were skinned bloody from scooping Mother up. But then the partisan came that night with his gun and a shovel. And he said, come. And he took her out into the field and said, start digging. And he had her dig her own grave. And after she had dug her grave, she said at that point, she didn't care if she lived or died anymore. And she just stood there, and she said after a while, he just dropped his gun and said, go in. But they knew that if they don't get away from there soon, they're not safe, because the commandant of that camp, what we call it the partisan disease, they would go like insane and do all kinds of things. And he was one of those. Whatever they took, drugs or whatever they took to do all those horrible things, I don't know. They were not safe with that story floating around the camp. So somehow my mother was able to escape from that camp with my sister one night. So my sister to this day says, she's 94, by the way, and still alive. She said, I don't know how our little mother had 6 grades of education. How did she know the geography? How did she know how to get back to our hometown? So she made it to the hometown with my sister, and the brick factory had been turned into a labor camp in the meantime. And she made contact with some people from that camp who told her that the commandant is at our house in town, waiting for her. And what he said he was going to do is tie her between the horses, quarter her, and take her to the camp and show everybody nobody escapes. But she found out that the death camp where I was only about a night's walk away north from our hometown. And so she and my sister made their way, and they were somehow able to get into the camp. It was very low tech, and all they had was guards constantly around the perimeter, you know. And so they made it into the camp, and how on earth did they, among 20-some thousand people, how did she find me? But they showed up one night, and she came in and tried to convince me she was my mother. But I didn't believe it because she was only half the woman she used to be. She was a round little German lady. You know, our men were proud of them when they were well fed. She tried to convince me that she was Mom, came close. Later on, she told me, she said, boy, you made me vomit when I came. I smelled so badly. And she ran out, and yeah. But she knew that my brother and I wouldn't last very long. So she made several trips in and out of the camp. She had found a way to get through, go to neighboring farmers who were Serbian or Hungarian, mostly Serbian, and beg some food. They were not against us. They were just too afraid to do anything. But they would throw you a piece of bread or something. Not everybody, but most of them. So she was able to bring some salt and some food and nurture me back. So she had the brilliant idea, at least the labor camp at the brick factory, they had better food, and maybe she could hide me out there. And so one night she decided it's time I could walk, and we made our way to the south to the brick factory, which, like I said, only a night's walk. But we were caught by some partisans. And it was illegal to have paper or pen or anything on you. But Mother somehow had found a piece of paper and pencil and knew that most of our guards were illiterate. She scribbled something on that paper, and then when we got caught, she turned it even upside down and said, I'm a trustee, and I have to deliver these people to the labor camp at the brick factory in Sentivan. And rather than admit they couldn't read, they said, okay, go. So there we got into the labor camp from Gakovo, from the death camp in October, November, I was told, I think. And from that time till the summer next year, I was able to recuperate, and my brother recuperated much faster. And had that not happened, I would not have survived, because in a death camp, people died from exposure and disease. And I understand that rats ate people and people ate rats eventually. And it was horrible. But lo and behold, they loaded us up and put us on the train and shipped us back to Gakavo, the death camp. There we heard horror stories that you don't want to even think about. So Mother decided, okay, what will we do? Rumors had started. We had different guards, and there were one or two who would take a bribe if you had something. And you could escape. The rumor was you could go to Hungary and then Austria. My sister wore my father's shirt layered. She was a smart girl. She was beautiful, and she made herself look so dowdy, wore my father's pants and shirts. But she had extra shirts, which we're not supposed to have, and gave that guard some of that and other things grandmother had gotten to us. Because grandmother was set free when Mother showed up. They had no quarrel with her. So it was in October, I believe, in 1946, we were finally, after 18 months, we were able to escape. That was an interesting night, too. My sister had spied out a path. Then Mother tried to navigate by the North Star or something, but it got so dark and cloudy, we didn't know where we were anymore. And before long, we had heard the dogs barking, and we started running through water and stuff. Thank God the dogs and the guards didn't catch us. So there were some corn stalks like teepees stacked up for drying. So each one of us was under one of those teepees waiting for morning to come. Apparently we were already in Hungary, and when the sun came up, we could see the guardhouse on the other side. So we just rejoiced, or I did. I thought we were finally free. Mother said, no, we're not, because the Russians occupied Hungary, and whoever was caught was shipped back to the camp. We made it through Hungary in about close to 3 weeks by means of walking and hiding, and then Mother would beg some food from some of the farmers. Every once in a while, kind farmers would give us a ride a little way when they go to market. We had to cross the Danube from the eastern shore to the western because it cuts straight through Hungary. But every bridge was guarded by Russian soldiers. So there was this one farmer, he said, there is a little barge someplace in the Danube. I'm going to market in Baja, and I will give you a ride to that barge. So, and as we got off and made our way to that barge, we heard a Russian soldier shout, "Stoi, stoi!" And of course we ran. And the more he said stoi, the harder we ran. But of course he caught up with us. All I remember that he caught me. And he knelt in front of me, came around and knelt in front of me and looked at me and kind of smiled. I don't remember hardly anything about this, but my sister just told me again last night. She said what he really did, he knelt down and he stroked your cheek and said, "You look like my little girl," and gave me something that I had dropped. And what I had dropped was my greatest treasure that I had in camp. So the Lord was kind to me and made a prayer book available to me, which was illegal. But I had tied it down around my waist, and when I jumped off the wagon, it must have fallen out. The soldier saw it and ran after us with a gun. So what you expect that you be arrested, you know? But he just handed me the book, and I had only 2 years of reading. But in that book, I found one prayer in particular that was written. It was a Catholic book, but it was by one of the saints, supposedly. And in essence, it said, "Lord, take my heart and break it open and see if it loves anything more than it loves you. Then I give you permission to tear it out of me. And Lord, even if I should cry and complain, don't listen to me and do it anyway. Then plant in the ground of my heart your cross and your crown, and close it up again and keep it safe, and teach me to love you more and more each day till I can die out of love for you. That was the prayer. Well, here we were at the Danube, crossover, and we had to make it through Hungary the rest of the way to the Austrian border. We had heard that there is some freedom. We didn't know that Austria had been divided up in 4 sections, the Russian, the American, the English, and the French sections. So we came across the border. The first time there seemed to be no problem crossing at all. Well, we had ended up in the Russian section, and they told us, you don't want to be here. So we made it back, and we went southward, and there was the English section. We made it through there. And my brother taught me the multiplication table as we were walking through Hungary. So he said, I don't want you to be a total dummy when you get there. So anyway, we arrived in Austria. We left in the fall of 46. It was either October or November. We arrived in a refugee camp, which used to be an old prisoner of war camp that the Germans had, that was run by English soldiers. And they handed us a bag and said, go to the woods, get leaves, stuff them full, make them into your mattress. They gave us a couple blankets. And my sister and I and my brother, we had to use one army cot together for sleeping. And the only way you could fit in there by lying on your side, like croissants entered into each other. And when you couldn't bear it anymore, you would grunt, and then everybody turned over. And that's how we started out. Anyway, first they put me into a old school and fattened me up with some other children. These children came from other areas as refugees, like displaced persons from Poland and other places. And that's where I got fattened up because I was just too weak. And then I could start school. I think it was in the spring of 47. I started 2nd grade. And then school was over in a month or 2. So the next fall I went, there was a one-room school, several grades together. So I went from 2nd grade in the next year all the way to 2nd year in our high school in town. And not that I was smart, I just enjoyed learning. And they pushed me on as fast as I could go. So at 16, I graduated then from school and got an opportunity to go into teachers' college because they needed teachers. However, I could only become a kindergarten teacher. We lived a pretty normal life. My brother went as an apprentice to be a car mechanic in Graz, which is the capital of Steiermark. And my sister became a seamstress. And then I became the kindergarten teacher. So we were never together. My mother was hired herself out as a live-in maid. And so most of the time I was just alone in the camp. I grew up pretty much alone. I didn't fit in with the other children for some reason. Some very bad things happened to me in the camp. Too bad to talk about. And I think I must have suffered a little bit from PTSD, whatever it's called. And so I just didn't fit in. And so in my aloneness, I just developed a little bit of my art skills and drew and stuff like that. But I didn't learn how to communicate with people. Being alone, I was awkward all the time. But I had the opportunity, like I said, to go to college. And then by 1950, 54, 53, I graduated, yes. And I taught as a kindergarten teacher for about 1.5 years.
What were things that you really wanted to make sure that your little kids knew?
I wanted them to have experiences. Just enjoy life and learn life, learn how things work, and took them for walks and plants and animals. And I didn't concentrate too much on ABCs yet. Just the basics, you know. I think we Right now, it's always get them started so early with all the academic stuff. I wanted them more to just be children. Probably didn't do them much of a favor, but they got lots of love. All the little boys wanted me to wait for them to grow up to marry me. Yeah. Now, the Austrian people, I must say, with the exception of a few, Austrian people were very kind, very open to us, very understanding. Only a few were kind of farther, go home, where do you come from? You don't belong here, and that kind of stuff. But not many. The Austrian people are wonderful people. Now, my dear mother, for my sake, I couldn't be a teacher if I didn't have citizenship. I was under 18, okay, graduated when I was 18. So she applied for citizenship for my sake. Then I would have had it automatically, you know. She didn't get her citizenship until I passed 18. And so I would have had to start from scratch. But the rest of my family, we were citizens without a country. And we were not Austrians. My sister's husband's mother was here already, and she sponsored her son. And then her son sponsored his wife, my sister. And she went before us. And then my mother, brother, and I followed. And we wanted, as a family, we've been separated so much all the time. We wanted to be together. That's why we decided to go where my sister was.
Yeah, and what year was that?
That was in 1955. I was 20 years old, yeah. And I came in the summer, I think it went up to 104 that summer in Philadelphia, coming from Austria, still wearing a coat, high up in the mountains. You know, it was a couple thousand feet high. I broke out like I had measles all over my body. Yeah. And this was the promised land. I mean, to go to a supermarket, what on earth is this? I mean, we had nothing in Austria. We, like I said, we used leaves for a mattress, and and food was, you know, what was an ice cream cone? Yeah, so, and it was the land of opportunity, yeah.
Ms. Clark, who's Eva Edl?
Chairman, that is not a name that I'm familiar with.
Well, I'll try to familiarize you with her. She's an 87-year-old pro-life advocate who survived a communist concentration camp in Yugoslavia after World War II that you guys have charged under the FACE Act for praying and singing in front of an abortion clinic. Is that the best use of the Justice Department's time and energy?
As noted, the FACE Act has been is a law that this body passed in response to efforts to obstruct access to reproductive health clinics, threats of violence, acts of violence. We follow the facts and apply the law without fear or favor, Chairman.
Really? I think we've heard a lot of that today about how if you're pro-life, you get the full treatment. Just ask Eva Edl, 87-year-old concentration camp survivor. But if you're on the other side, after the Dobbs decision, it's a different issue. In spite of what you've said, that you apply it equally across the board.
That was a recent clip from a congressional hearing on December 5th. Congressman Jim Jordan was interviewing Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clark about some of the recent cases that the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division is prosecuting. Oma Eva is facing charges for violating the FACE Act for participating in the rescue in Mount Juliet, Tennessee.
Part 2 of Eva's interview will be released on January 9th. Thank you for listening. Subscribe to Stifled Cry wherever podcasts are found to be notified when new episodes are published. Help us get the cry out by sharing this podcast with your friends on social media and leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. Please help us make the cry louder by supporting us at stifledcry.com.